Most people walk through life solving the wrong problem. They believe their struggle is external circumstances, too difficult, people too demanding, world too harsh. But sit with this for a moment. The real prison was built inside, brick by brick, through 1,000 small surrenders, each one invisible at the time, each one justified as courtesy, maturity, or kindness. The Stoics had a precise name for this: enslavement to opinion. It is not loudly chains. It is the gentle erosion that happens when your nervous system becomes permanently wired to seek comfort through external validation. Your mind learns early that safety lives inside approval. That agreement equals survival. So you become exquisitely skilled at reading rooms, adjusting voices, softening truths, reshaping yourself before anyone even speaks. This is what most people call being a good person. But beneath that politeness, something has already surrendered. You are no longer living from principle, you are performing from fear. Watch people carefully, and the pattern becomes obvious. Someone receives even mild pushback, and their entire frame shifts. Their posture changes, their tone becomes apologetic. They immediately begin reorganizing their argument, not because new truth appeared, but because disagreement triggered an ancient alarm. You are being rejected. Another person sits in silence for longer than usual and feels compelled to fill it. Their words come faster, their explanations multiply. They cannot tolerate the temporary uncertainty that accompanies not being fully understood. The quiet itself feels like abandonment. A third watches a conversation end awkwardly and cannot let it rest. They replay it mentally for hours. They construct elaborate explanations for why they didn't mean what they said. They send additional messages clarifying points nobody questioned, all because the mind cannot rest while disapproval remains unresolved. This is not sensitivity. This is not emotional intelligence. This is reactivity, mistaken for consciousness. The architecture of psychological dependence. Epictetus said something that exposes the entire mechanism. It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about those things. Yet most people operate as though other people's judgments are the things themselves. They collapse the distinction completely. Someone criticizes their work, and they feel physically wounded, not by the work, but by the judgment. They interpret mild disagreement as fundamental rejection. They take silence as disapproval, and slowly, their entire emotional architecture becomes built around managing external perception rather than governing internal clarity. The trap is subtle because society enthusiastically rewards it. Schools praise cooperative students, workplaces promote agreeable employees, families celebrate the child who never creates tension. You receive constant positive reinforcement for the exact behavior that erodes your autonomy, so you never realize what is being slowly purchased with that comfort, your freedom. Real freedom is not comfortable. It requires the willingness to disappoint people, to be misunderstood persistently, to hold a position even when the room shifts against you, to speak truth even when approval would be easier. And most people have been trained away from this their entire lives. The cost of comfort. What makes this dangerous is the compound effect. Each small surrender seems harmless. One apology when you weren't wrong, one softened opinion to avoid tension, one moment of shrinking to protect someone else's feelings. They accumulate silently. Years pass, and one day you realize that you no longer know what you actually believe. Your values have become so malleable, adjusted so constantly to different audiences, that no core remains. You have become a mirror, a perfectly responsive, perfectly adaptable mirror, and mirrors have no interior. The person who experiences this often feels something like depression, though they cannot explain why. Externally, their life appears successful. No drama, no conflict. Everyone gets along. Yet internally, something hollow has developed. They have been so committed to being okay for everyone around them that no one inside remains. This is where the Stoic practice becomes essential, not as a self-help technique, but as an act of self-preservation. What the Stoics understood. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about distraction from one's own purpose. He understood that the moment you hand your emotional baseline over to external approval, you have surrendered the one thing you can actually control, your faculty of judgment. The Stoics did not advocate for cruelty or indifference. That is a common misunderstanding. They advocated for clarity about what is yours and what is not yours. Your opinions are yours. Your principles are yours. Your reactions are yours. What others think about these things is not yours. It never was. Most people live as though they own responsibility for everyone else's emotional state, while abandoning responsibility for their own. They apologize for being honest. They shrink to protect others' egos. They become endlessly accommodating to feelings that belong entirely to someone else. Meanwhile, their own emotional weather goes unmanaged, unexamined, unowned. This is the exact inversion of what a healthy mind requires, the discipline of boundaries. There is a specific moment where this pattern becomes visible, and it happens around limits. Watch someone set a boundary. A grounded person sets it clearly, briefly, and then remains unmoved by whatever reaction follows. Their boundary was not a request. It was a statement of what they will and will not do, done. Someone enmeshed in approval dependence, though, sets the same boundary, but immediately begins managing the other person's disappointment about it. They over-explain. They soften the language. They suggest alternatives. They minimize their own need to be right, so the other person feels less wrong. And the boundary, which should be a line, becomes a negotiation. The other person learns immediately, pressure still works. If they look disappointed enough, express doubt enough, the limit will shift. So of course they keep testing. And the person desperate for approval keeps adjusting. The relationship finds a new equilibrium, but it is built entirely on false ground. What composure actually is? True composure is not the absence of feeling. It is not coldness or detachment. It is something much more precise, the ability to remain psychologically anchored while emotional pressure attempts to move you. To feel fully without being controlled by what you feel. When composure becomes real, not performed, something in social dynamics shifts immediately. People begin to sense that you are not operating from desperation. Your calmness during their upset does not trigger them further. Instead, it creates strange space. Suddenly, they are forced to look at their own reaction without your anxious energy amplifying it. This is the precise opposite of what approval-dependent people do. They tend to match emotional intensity. Someone becomes angry, and they become nervous. Someone becomes distant, and they become chasing. The emotional temperature of the other person becomes the emotional thermostat of the room. Grounded people break this pattern. Their steadiness does not invite matching. It invites recalibration. The mechanism of real influence. One of the deepest insights the Stoics offered is that true influence grows silently. It is not established through force or emotional performance. It is established through consistency, through repeated demonstrations that certain principles hold regardless of circumstance. A person who remains calm during disagreement slowly becomes difficult to move emotionally. Others begin to assume that agitation will not sway them, so they bother less to agitate them. A person who honors their own time becomes recognized as someone whose time is not endlessly available. Not because they announced it, but because they lived it repeatedly. This is the opposite of attention-seeking. It is attention disinterest, and paradoxically, it creates more real respect than any amount of trying to be impressive ever could. The person constantly seeking reassurance often ends up carrying less influence. Why? Because their need is visible, and human nature tends to respect what appears whole rather than what appears fractured. The person who can sit in uncertainty without scrambling to fix it communicates something powerful. I am already okay inside myself. The final surrender. But there is a final stage to this collapse that most people do not see coming. It happens when you have been so thoroughly conditioned to adjust yourself that you no longer experience adjustment as a loss. It feels normal. It feels like maturity. Someone offers an unwelcome opinion, and you immediately soften your position, and you believe this flexibility is wisdom. Someone withdraws approval, and you immediately restructure your behavior, and you label it growth. You have not grown. You have been colonized. Your mind has been occupied by an external force so completely that you no longer recognize the occupation. This is why Marcus Aurelius repeatedly wrote reminders to himself, not about other people, but about his own thinking. He knew the danger. He knew how easily a powerful mind could become enslaved by its own endless internal negotiations with external judgment. The practice is not complicated. It is simply the radical act of returning to your own authority, of looking at your own thinking directly, of asking, is this my conviction or my conditioning? Is this my principle or my protection? Am I speaking this truth or swallowing this lie? The moment someone stops treating disapproval like an emergency, everything begins to change, not dramatically. The nervous system does not rewire overnight. But in small moments, when you choose not to over-explain, when you hold a silence instead of filling it, when you remain calm while someone attempts to provoke you, something internal reorganizes. You begin to experience a small gap between what happens and how you respond to it. That gap is everything. That is where freedom actually lives, not in changing circumstances. In that tiny space where you choose your response rather than inherit it from your fear. The Stoics spent their entire philosophy exploring that space. Because everything else, composure, influence, integrity, peace grows naturally from that single capacity, the ability to choose your response before impulse chooses it for you. And once you taste that, the need for approval begins to lose its grip, not through force, but through irrelevance. You have tasted something more valuable. You have tasted autonomy.